but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we are showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make decisions.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because it happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having Maori Wars doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Good evening, good evening. What an exciting, fun-filled, thrilling week it's been.
Yeah. I don't know what's worse, me getting knocked out of Facebook or the VS budget.
I honestly think you getting locked out of Facebook was the most exciting thing and the budget was the most depressing thing. Couple of very quick things for housekeeping before we kick off. We've got Priyanca and Clint both joining us in just a moment, so I'll pull them in very soon. But before then, we're running a poll on the YouTube page at the moment, asking how you felt about this week's budget. Was it worse than expected, about what you expected, or better than people expected? For some reason, people don't seem to be going for that third option about it being better than expected. We're also trying a new thing at the moment where we're putting the chat up on the screen. We've had a few people tell us it's a much easier way to be able to access the chat that comes through from multiple sources, particularly for people who have vision impairment issues. So we're hoping that this just makes it a little bit easier for people to see. And then on Monday, over on Blake's channel, on your channel, Blake, we're going to be having a chat to Tracy Martin, the former New Zealand First MP. And she's doing something with seniors now, isn't she?
Yeah, she's the head of the aged care, aged with a D, because I can't say that, care association.
No, that's fair. That makes sense. But yeah, she'll be, is it 7:30 that we're doing it Monday?
I think so. But we'll double check that. As I say, technology's been down, so it's been a bit difficult. Anyway.
Absolutely. Right, I'm not even going to press the play buttons because I don't have a video with both Clint and Priyanka introducing their names. So I'm just going to bring them in because they don't need any fancy introduction. We all know how brilliant they absolutely are. Good evening, you two. How's everybody holding up?
Good evening.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Thanks for having me on. Holding up in budget urgency at the moment. We'll be sitting till midnight.
Yeah.
Very fun.
It sounds exhausting.
So, Priyanka, you are the spokesperson, as we all know by now, for disability issues. So, as we speak, because we've all got our footage on in the background, they're actually doing another bill right now, which impacts social security. So, shall we start with that? So, what are they doing as we speak? Watching.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Blake. I think that's a good way to get into all of what they're doing at the moment. But currently in the House, we are debating a bill under all stages under urgency. So again, there's not a lot of information or analysis on this particular bill. It's a social assistance amendment piece of legislation, and what it really does is it penalizes people who have boarders. People who board in their house. So since 1992, there's been as an incentive, if for example, if you have 3 or 4 people who board in your house with you, you only it's only from the third border onwards that starts to impact your eligibility for accommodation supplement. The first two borders, there's no penalty for having a couple of extra people boarding in your house, and that was because it was meant to be an incentive to, when you are in a large state house, as many of our state houses are, and you've got extra rooms, it was an incentive for you to then have a couple of people stay with you, so more people are housed, and the board that they pay you then helps to offset the cost of living increases from having additional people in your house. So this is something that's been around for decades, but this government has decided to make a change, which will mean that on average, people in this situation will be $100 per week worse off. And if you're in social housing, you'll be $132 worse off a week. So, and it says specifically in the analysis that one of the groups that will be disproportionately impacted by this are disabled people. Because as we know, there's not a lot of choice when it comes to accessible housing, and so people tend to board together. But also many disabled people don't have a lot of choice, so they have their caregiver boarding with them. Now, all of them will be impacted by this, and this is being pushed through urgency by the Minister for Social Development, who is also the Minister for Disability Issues. So it is horrific. I've been in the House tonight with colleagues pushing back on this, on the first two readings of the bill. We're at committee stage now where we are examining the bill clause by clause to ask her why she's ramming this through so quickly, and to sort of, tease out the detail of just how bad this is going to be.
Urgency seems to be a really handy tool at the moment for this lot. Putting things through that are clearly not popular, clearly impact people in a negative way, doing it in a rush. Does it give you guys much in the way of prep time if everything's under urgency? How much more difficult is it to mount a defense and to become a really solid opposition to some of these changes if you don't get the heads up on it?
Yeah, look, it makes things a lot harder. Let's not forget that the pay equity legislation that effectively cancelled 33 active pay equity claims, including the care and support workers claim that, again, disproportionately impacts disabled people, was also rammed through all stages of the bill under urgency. So there are different ways to do it. You could have the first reading under urgency. That then means, that's not so bad. It means you still get a select committee stage. You could have all stages under urgency and still have a select committee stage over a few days. Those are all choices the government can make, but they've chosen the worst possible option, which is no select committee stage for any of these. So this bill, this Social Security bill, there's also another bill that we will be debating in the House today, a Social Security one, and that makes it mandatory for reviews of your, I think it's accommodation supplement again. I have to read the bill again properly. But you know how you have it reviewed in a 52-week period, and it's really onerous for people. You've got to prove again and again. Oh, it includes supported living payment and disability, by the way, disability allowance. So you have to go back to the doctor, get your certification, and every year you've got to prove that you still have a disability. They're going to make that mandatory now. So previously it was discretionary, and WINS officers, case managers could decide if it was needed or not. Now it's going to be mandatory, and if you don't provide the evidence within a specified period of time, you're just going to have your benefit cut. With, I think, no possible way to have that reviewed. So again, to your question, it makes it really difficult because you get a piece of legislation and you've got to debate it immediately. There's often, pages and pages of analysis, if they've done an analysis on this bill, that you've got to get your head around to be able to then hold them to account for the decisions that they're making. In some cases, like from memory, the pay equity bill, there's often no regulatory impact statement, which means there is no detailed analysis anywhere of the bill. There's often no engagement or consultation with those impacted. So that would have come through in a select committee process, but of course that's cut out as well. So it really makes it's really bad lawmaking ultimately to push such large controversial bills through urgency and all stages of it.
Yeah. Clint, what did you see in this bill for disabled people or not for disabled people?
Well,
when you were doing the numbers.
Yeah, the big thing for me was looking in the economic update for the line Disability Support Services, the DSS, and because the headline was $1 billion extra, right? But there's always some tricks in that because it's over 4 years and it doesn't include money they're taking out. They only tell you about the money they're putting in. So the actual increase in funding from the year that's currently ending on June 30th to next year is not $1 billion, not 250 million, it's 119 million, and still sounds like a lot, but that's off a total DSS budget of 2.7 billion. So it's a 4.5% increase, which is the smallest we've had in at least 5 years. The last 4 years, the average increase was 12%. And we all know the sector was struggling to keep up with inflation, with growing demand and growing complexity of need during that period. This year, that increase is only 4.5%. So you think about inflation, you think about wages, you think about the growing number of people, the growing number of disabled people, and the growing complexity of need, and you say it's 4.5% going to keep up? I don't think so. And the other thing was going through. I was assembling for a report I was doing that where are the cuts, and I was going through them in order, and I was thinking to myself, they're saying they cut a lot of money, but the cuts I'm seeing are quite small. Where's this money? And then I got to the pay equity line. $13 billion out of the pockets of low-income working people, mainly women. And so many of them work in the disability sector, don't they? It's the care and support workers, it's the community nurses. And they've just been ripped off. They've had their rights taken away so that the government could fill a hole that it created in the budget with those landlord tax cuts. And so it was just blew my mind that it was $13 billion. That's an average of hundreds of dollars a week per worker. It's shocking.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump in here real quick. I've got a couple of questions that actually popped up in the chat around what you were saying before, Priyanka. I'm just wondering if you could clarify on this. Does this mean that there's no opportunity to challenge any fuck-ups that Wins make going forward?
We don't know that yet, is the short answer. When we get to that, so the bill that I'm assuming this is to do with the 52 weeks review, mandatory review, there should be an appeal process to that. But the short answer is we'll find out when we examine the bill. That'll be later tonight. As I said, we're here till midnight, so we have a bit of time to go through the detail there. The other thing that they're doing, so both with that bill and this accommodation assistance, the borders bill that I mentioned as well, is they're bringing in an automated system. So previously they would have frontline workers who you could go and talk to if you had an issue. They're automating the system. So, the review period will come up, it'll be automated, you'll be probably sent an email to say you've got, in 8 weeks, if you don't, from memory, it's 8 weeks. If you don't get us the documentation that we need, we're going to be cutting your benefit. If you respond to that email to say that, yes, so they'll list, here's all the information you've told us. If there's any change, come back and let us know. If there's no change, the entire process is automated. If there is a change to your circumstances, then a human, a caseworker gets involved and will work with you to figure out if you're, what's changed and so on and so forth. So it becomes a person at that point. But again, I'm not sure what the appeal, there should be an appeal process there if the caseworker gets it wrong as well. There needs to be, but that's kind of what we're teasing out in the House now.
So I've just, for context, I've just done my review. So I've actually gone through this already. So what I got was the form saying, if you've got any changes, please send the information to us as soon as possible. If you haven't got any changes, you don't need to do anything. So that's
Okay.
so that's really interesting. So
Yeah.
maybe ask for some clarifications around that if you get the opportunity later on. But yeah.
We saw over yesterday one of the big changes that sort of made headlines was around KiwiSaver, the government contribution to that obviously being halved. That's not great, and I've had it pop up on TikTok, to be honest, a number of times from mortgage brokers just going, "This is worse than I thought it was going to be." When it comes to that government input into the government contribution to KiwiSaver, it's if you hit a certain amount of money that you put in there each year. But we know from the research that's out there that those people living with disabilities and working tend to be at the lower end of the income earner spectrum. Is this another one of those policies that's going to have a detrimental effect to the disabled community in a far bigger way than people realize?
Clint, you go.
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, like you say. So how it works now is that the government will give 25 cents for every dollar that you put in, and your contribution rate, default rate, will go from 3% to 4%. So when you do the maths on that, that means that you have to be earning at least $25,000 a year in earnings. Not. I don't think benefits apply count. That then you'll end up putting $1,000 into your KiwiSaver from that, and then the government will come and put its $250. But if you don't make that much money, you don't get the $250. You get less.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's always been a problem with KiwiSaver's design in that way, but again, it's just made worse.
Yeah, because like if they, just going back to my situation, if they keep that system, like if there's been no changes, you don't need to do anything, that could actually be quite positive for some of the disabled community. I think, I don't know whether any of you disagree or agree with that, but like I found it a lot easier than having to get my family to sign a bunch of forms if they keep it like that. I'd actually be supportive of that. Because, I don't know.
Yeah.
Interested to get you guys' thoughts on that one.
I think what I've been mulling over in terms of what all of this means for disability communities, for disabled people and carers, it's tempting to kind of look at the budget line by line and try and work out what that one bit means for a group of people. But I mean, firstly, the context of this budget, as we've already said, and as Clint has pointed out really well, is that everything that is in this budget is off the backs of underpaid, undervalued people, mostly women, including many who work in our mental health and addiction facilities, disability facilities as well. So that's already, a punch in the guts, really. And then you've got pittance in the budget itself for disabled people. So again, as Clint pointed out really well, the DSS funding in here is literally won't even keep the lights on. It's not even keeping up with inflationary expenses. And this is against the backdrop of the massive cuts that they've made over the last year and a half. Let's not forget that. The removal of flexibility from disability support funding, the freeze on new entrants into residential care facilities. Yeah. Yes, there's a little bit of an uplift in the budget for them. I think it says 60 million. I'd be keen to hear your analysis on that as well, Clint, if there's something in there that we're potentially missing. But I'm not sure that that's going to make up for the devastation that has been caused by this government for disabled people over the year and a half that we've seen. The gutting of FICA. I mean, they get what? I think it says in the budget 20 million, but when you look at the one-off uplifts and, you exclude that, they're actually getting hardly anything extra to do the system leadership transformation work that they need to do for us to become a more inclusive, accessible society. So then it leaves us with really just the learning support aspect in the education budget. And I will acknowledge that the community that, our disability communities have been crying out for learning support funding to be increased. Well, actually, it's not learning support funding to be increased. It's for children to be central and to be able to exert some choice and control over the support they get to be able to learn. So let's not conflate the two, because the highest needs review that we did when we were in government showed that just throwing money at the learning support aspect of this isn't enough, because the system's broken. It needs to be fixed. And I think if anyone's keen for a bit of an analysis, Joanne Duckombe has shared a really good analysis on her LinkedIn page around this particular aspect of learning support. Basically, what people have been asking for was a strategy or a plan to fix the issue. Just adding money to increase the number of teacher aides is one part of that, but it's not going to fix the problem. Centralized funding was another one that they were asking for, and it's not clear whether there's centralized funding or whether this is just, again, fund operational budgets, that this money needs to come out of operational budgets of schools, because if that's the case, then that's problematic. The other big piece that is missing here is the fact that we've had report after report showing us that those who work in the system, so teacher aides and teachers, don't get the they don't learn about neurodivergence. So there's no teaching for them to be able to deal effectively with students who have learning disabilities and are neurodivergent. There's nothing in this that will fix that. And then there's the slap in the face of 46 million for private schools on top of that. So, they've kind of managed to dilute, give you a little bit that sounds really good, but there's no fundamental fix, and there's absolutely nothing in here for disability communities and carers.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Clint?
I've just been reflecting, because I only just heard about it now. The borders changed that Priyanka was talking about, and I've just looked it up. And it just strikes me as such a mean-hearted thing to do, because this isn't tons of money. They think it's going to save the government $28 million over a year eventually, but you're taking this money from poor people who are giving accommodation to other people who are now going to be disincentivized to do it. And so I can see why in talkback land it sounds like, oh, these people in state houses and they're renting out a room and they're getting more money. Well, we can't have that. But in a practical sense, you're helping to decrease the pressure on the housing stock, because you're making better use of these houses, and now that incentive is taken away from people. It just sums up so much that we see in this budget. It's petty, and it makes worse outcomes, for what in the scale of the government's budget is such a small amount of money. It's really taken me back just learning about it just now from Priyanka. That the other things, I mentioned just before we came on air that extra, I think it's $6 million a year for getting people out of hospitals and into residential care. So when they froze residential care about a year ago, groups were writing to them pretty quickly saying, people are ending up stuck in hospital because there aren't any places now. So, yep, okay, it's good to see that they've put someone into that. I don't know if that's the scale that's going to address that issue or not, but it is good to see that one thing. But it's a pretty lonely bright spot amongst everything else that I see here.
Yeah. Can I just add to that as well? In addition, and I completely agree, Clint, it's so mean-spirited what they're doing. It's like they're just squeezing the people who can afford it the least from every which direction. And so what this is actually doing is penalizing you for giving up rooms to boarders, right? For having boarders in your space. So then what are you going to do if you can't afford to lose that $130 or $100 per week? You stop having boarders. That doesn't then address the issue of where they're going to go. We know that homelessness is increasing. That's what's going to happen to them. Or you think, oh, maybe emergency housing. But this budget has gutted $1 billion from the emergency housing fund as well. So that's not even going to be an option. So what are we going to see? More grants for people to live in tents and in cars.
And that could include disabled people, as
yes.
harrowing as it is to say. People are asking, is there anything in the budget that indicates that the freezing for residential will stop?
No, not that I've seen anyway. I've been meeting with residential care facilities and families who've been waiting, people who you would have all heard the story, worked for 5 years to finally get a suitable place for their adult disabled child, only to be told that wait lists have been wiped overnight when that announcement was made in August last year. And this freeze has been going on since then. Facilities have been told that it will probably be lifted in June, but that's just hearsay. I haven't been able to get a definitive answer from the minister through questions either. So everyone's just been in limbo as a result. And as Clint said, we've seen people languishing in hospitals, not just hospitals, but in psych wards, because the funding for community care was cut and residential care had a pause on new entrants. So it's taken this for them to give us this pittance in the budget.
Just to finish, I know you and I have been doing our bit, Priyanka, but before we let you go, what do people, as well as us, keep on fighting, you and I, what can the community do now that the budget's out, that we found out we're only getting 119 million on top of what we already had? What can we do now? What can the community do?
A couple of things, and I get that all of this has been very bleak, and it's been bleak for a while now for people, and so that's tough. A few things, right? So firstly, for me and for us in the Labour Party, we're at a position where we are developing policies for the next election. So I would be really keen. We've got our own internal processes. It's a very democratic process where all members have a say into what goes into our policy manifesto, and we'll go through that. But equally, I'll be keen to hear from disabled people, carers, and our wider disability community in terms of what they want to see and what's most important for them. Because let's face it, there's going to be a lot to fix. We're not going to have a lot of money to play with, and we'll need to prioritize. So really keen to hear from people what's most important for them. That's one. Secondly, let's never forget what the last year and a half. So while it is bleak, it has been horrible. I mean, I've heard from so many people who the stories are heartbreaking in terms of how devastating this is. Let's use that to organize and get this lot out, because finally what we need is to get back onto, and I admit things weren't perfect prior to March 18th last year, but I believe wholeheartedly that we were going in the right direction with the establishment of Whaikaha, rolling out EGL. I agree it was probably a bit too slow. It needs to be done better, and we need to look at how that can be done better. But the entire trajectory has been derailed by this government. So we need to do better, and we need to give them out.
So rest assured, people, that me and Priyanka and all of our connection and colleague will continue to fight on the front line as much as we shouldn't have to. We'll keep talking about that, I'm sure. Any comment you want to make before we let everybody have their night for?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Priyanka, for being able to juggle things to get here, because I know it's obviously very hectic there in the house. Is there any feedback that you've had in the last sort of 24 hours from people that gives you hope for the future?
People give me hope for the future. Look at how people have turned out since March 18th, rallies, community meetings, social media, some of the, just the stories that people have shared, the way our disability community has been coming together to fight back. That gives me hope. And we need to do that and stand together as we do it. I can only ever be an ally, but I will be the best ally that I can be.
We can both be allies, Priyanka.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. We better let you get back in and give them shit, because they absolutely need it. Tell them we told them to fuck off, and
I'll stay for a minute if you like.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for having me on. I am going to run back to the house now. But
Thank you, Priyanka. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So,
jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, like, disability is actually at the nexus of a lot of what's happening with this government. You've got the underfunding of the disability sector, and you've got the hundreds of thousands of disabled people in this country who are affected by that, but also the pay equity thing, which is huge and which I think should be an absolute millstone around the neck of this government and up until the election. And there's hundreds of thousands of workers affected there. So together, the disability sector, you do have power this election. Everyone's got the vote, right? Votes count, because if you want to see change, we have to get these guys out. That's the truth of it. Everyone's tried to engage with them nicely. Everyone's tried to present logic, and at the margins, occasionally, like that money to get people out of hospitals and into residential care, there's been little movements. But we know the direction this is going, and the direction it will keep on going unless we change the government. So, for me, I think the disability sector, the disabled people, your friends, your whānau, the workers, there's a lot of votes there, and that's a lot of power. And use that power. That's what I'd say.
The really interesting thing, Clint, is that final number of 13 billion saved from that pay equity is absolutely astonishing. Like I want to go back to that function that you and I attended about a week ago. Like because what people don't realize is local government runs into central government as much as it does. So we need people like Andrew Little to be back in local government to help the central government. So one of the policies that I really liked listening to at that press event was he wanted to keep the hydrotherapy pools and stuff like that.
Yes.
That is so important right now.
Yeah. Those community facilities, right, are really important, and that local government pays its workers fairly, and keeps community housing as well, and all those things. It all matters, absolutely.
So, in essence, then, what do you think that people need to, that candidates need to do as we go into these local elections to support the disabled community? Now that this budget has gone out, like Andrew Little, or like whoever gets in anywhere.
Yeah, I think that it is limited for local government. They don't have so many levers to pull, but I think those community facilities are so important, aren't they? That they can be some of the last public places that people can just be. And Andrew, of course, is committed to funding those things that were going to be cut back or cancelled. And the council housing and living wage pay equity, councils should be pursuing that if central government won't. But the big story here though is the election next year, and we've got to organise. I think that groups need to organise a citizens-initiated referendum on the pay equity. I think it would be a great thing for the opposition parties, the left, to rally around and bring us together. And it would, when people first put it to me, I said, "Oh, that's a huge effort." I remember the asset sales referendum, but you know what? With the workers who have been directly affected, the people who are affected, like the disability community, from the care and support workers not getting their fair pay, we can make that happen, and that would make pay equity a central issue in the next election. I think that's really important.
Do you think pay equity going to be the clincher for the election for both sides? That'll be the So the cost of living was 2023. Will pay equity be the 2023 version of
I think it can. I think that it ought to be, and the question is always, how do you, like, for a political movement, how do you keep that issue alive? How do you keep it front and center? It's really important. I think that today Labour has come out and clearly said that they will restore the pay equity law and being unambiguous about that, and it's because it not only is it a huge actual injustice, it also tells you everything you need to know about this government and where the opposition stand, right? Because these guys decided that the rights of workers, of female workers, the people who, do enormously hard work, helping people who need care in our community, they decided that their rights could be sacrificed so that they could fill a hole in the budget that they created by giving tax cuts to landlords that everyone told them they couldn't afford. And I think that just the moral bankruptcy of doing that and of trying to slam it through under urgency before they thought anyone would notice, I think it absolutely should be a major issue at the next election. Absolutely.
Anything else you want to add, Paul?
I've always got things to ask. I'm actually kind of curious about your communication background and your thoughts on the use of a certain word in Parliament, and that is a distraction technique.
Yeah, I mean, it was Brooke Van Velden using it in Parliament was absolutely the dead cat bounce, right? It's, hey, look at that, rather than look at the substance of the issue. And there's nothing National would rather talk about more than sort of shallow level identity politics. Whereas, how dare you criticize me? You're criticizing me because I'm a woman. Well, no, you've been criticized for what you've done to women and to low-paid workers. So, but I think it's also the reality, right? Like, Labour probably should have anticipated that was going to happen and not given the opening. And that doesn't mean that Brooke Van Velden was right to do it. But it does mean that you have to see, if you do X, they're going to do Y. And if you don't want them to do it, don't give the opening. And I think we've seen that. We see that quite a bit still on the left, that, like, you do have to anticipate that the other guys are going to play dirty and not give them the chance.
Yeah. Anything else before we let Clint go, Paul?
I am very curious to know your thoughts around the changes to the benefit for 18 and 19-year-olds.
It's just, again, it's like this borders thing. It's just mean-hearted, Like, so you're 19 years old. You've moved out. You may have been moved out for a couple of years, right, from home by then. You lose your job, and MSD's going to go back and say to your mum and dad, who you might not have a good relationship with, are you able economically to support this person? Yes. I want no benefit for them then. Doesn't mean you're going to get the money. Doesn't mean you're going to get that support. And so, again, for like a cheap headline, for a cheap talkback bait, they've actually made the lives of Kiwis who are already doing it tough worse. And it's just, can't we be better than this as a country? What happened to, they used to mock Jacinda talking about kindness, but, like, at least that's a value, like, right? Yeah. We don't have to go
in
mean.
The complete opposite direction.
Yeah. So that's how I feel.
It reminds me of, and this is probably me showing my age, they used to have something very similar in place for the student allowance.
Yeah.
Where up until, I think it was 24, you were, if you got an allowance and how much you got was based on how much your parents earned. And I always found that really annoying, especially for people who had moved, from one end of the country to the other to go to uni. And you suddenly have to, based on what your parents are earning, wherever it was that they were, or it wasn't very much to begin with. You got punished for having parents who were working hard, and they might have had other kids to deal with, other things. It just feels like an unfair system to me.
Yeah. Are you an adult or not? Is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be imprisoned as an adult.
Go through until you're 20 now.
Yeah. It's, There's no moral basis behind it. There's no logic basis behind it. It's just, as Nicola Willis put it, those kids on the PlayStations on the couch. And it's like, so youth unemployment has increased by 50% in the last 2 years. Do we think that that's because the PlayStation's got that much more awesome? Or is it because the country's lost 30,000 jobs?
Yeah.
I think it's probably because the country's lost 30,000 jobs, and it's always the young people and the disabled and Māori and Pacifica who get the raw deal of that.
So it's just another budget with raw deals.
Although there are some cracking games out at the moment.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. And there's probably more games out there to play than there are jobs at the moment for people.
Well, there we go.
It's very depressing. Very, very depressing. Was there anything then in that budget on a positive note that makes you go, you know what, maybe this one little thing is a glimmer of hope? We shouldn't be, completely fucked off with absolutely everything in there.
The thing I mentioned before about that money to get people out of hospitals and into residential care was a positive. There weren't a lot of others. This is going to be another negative, I'm afraid. But the big thing that they've been promoting is this investment boost. And sure, if you're a company now, effectively you can say basically the government's taking 5% off the price of buying a piece of kit, whatever it is. That's basically what they've done. If you're a company, okay, great, but it's costing an enormous amount of money, and it's meant to boost the economy by 1% over the next 20 years, which they don't know. They can't predict the size of the economy that accurately for any length of time. There's only 20 years. So this was the growth budget, and their big growth thing was the economy would be 1% bigger than it otherwise would be in 2045. If the robots haven't taken over by then, I guess. It's just a joke, really. So sorry, that was meant to be the good thing, but it's not.
I'll try spinning something else then. A couple of months ago, our current Deputy Prime Minister, who I think's in the job for another week, started making threatening noises to Radio New Zealand because they were asking him questions he didn't like answering about all of the bullshit that he does. This budget, they had their funding cut by $18 million over 4 years. Is that a thing we should be concerned about, that a politician can go out there, make those threats, and we can see the follow through on those threats with the idea of independent media in this country?
Yeah, it's chilling, isn't it? And there's things like this happening now that it previously kind of standards, unspoken rules would have stopped that kind of behavior, and those unspoken rules seem to be falling by the wayside. And it's worrying because they cut some money this budget, maybe they cut some more the next, or maybe RNZ then gets a leadership who become a bit more compliant because they're worried about losing what they have left, and that's the worry, right? We've already got the Herald owned by this billionaire who wants it to be more right wing, and now the government is basically putting a barrel to RNZ's head and saying, be more compliant, otherwise your funding's going to go down.
Stuff was very compliant. RNZ was very News Talk ZB was very compliant in their beliefs, or the way that they put out the budget afterwards. Paddy Gower had some weird moment over it all. Are we seeing a shift in our media because they're sitting there going, well, shit, we could be under threat? There is a risk here.
It's a possibility, and this is why it's so important that we do have alternative media such as yourselves and others putting out news and covering it. You're not beholden to any billionaires or any government funding, and so you can. Not
that if billionaires wanted to give me money, I would say no. Then give me a call. At least have a chat about it.
Yeah. But it's a worry. It really is. So yeah, it's all the more important that we have guys like you out there.
Yep. Just lastly, people are talking about the prescription thing down here. Is it correct that it's moving to 12 months instead of 3?
For some.
Yeah, and that does seem on the surface. It's not something I'm very familiar with, so I didn't put it on my good list, but perhaps it should be. I suspect the reasoning is they want to reduce the load on GPs, so they don't, because we all know that there's huge wait times to see GPs at the moment. So, if it's not, people are having to get their scripts refilled so often, although that doesn't always take the doctor. Maybe that's the logic of it, and that could be positive if it does free up more GP time for people to get seen earlier. I haven't seen any sort of detailed argument around it, though.
Yeah, it could be a good policy if done correctly, I think.
I think the problem with the policy is actually what we're seeing in the chat at the moment, where there is no clear details that people seem to be able to lock on. And you might be able to, pay for 12 months worth of medication if it's safe to do so. It might be a case of going in every 3 months and still paying, but not needing to go to the doctor to get the script, so you can do that. I don't know that the detail is there yet for people to be able to lock in exactly how it could be beneficial or negative.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's not one I know enough about, I'm afraid, but we'll have to see how it evolves. And this is the thing: there's always sort of technical improvements that are made at the margins that are not, that can be good, but doesn't change the big picture, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us tonight, Clint. It was always good to have you on to crunch all the numbers and bits and pieces.
Well, thank you very much for having me, guys.
You're very
thank you
welcome.
for being here. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
See, I always feel like I've learned so much when Clint's here, because the numbers are just... his Twitter feed is one of the only reasons I still browse Twitter. I haven't posted on there in months, but I just get so much information from it. I feel so learned afterwards.
We're going to go to the news, and then we've got a couple of reminders that we had at the top of the show.
So before we go to the news, should we read some super chats?
You got
those
some of
before I
those.
jump into the news. So we have this one that's coming from Sam. Budget was the afterpay budget because borrowing on the credit card is bad, according to Nikki Noboats, but using afterpay, also known as PPPs, is good. I don't know if Nikki knows the difference. I mean, I doubt she has an actual credit card that she has to borrow from because it's Nikki. But who knows? Who knows?
We had to be careful with that one, otherwise we might be giving Pat ideas to make Nikki no change t-shirts or no credit t-shirts or something.
Nikki no credit would be a worry. We have this one here from the Kaweasel. I'm here to eat Doritos and kick out Tories, and all out of Doritos. Damn, Doritos do sound good about now, but kicking out Tories, I'm totally up for that. Absolutely. And from Howie, we've got, they are full-on 19th century industrialists. Couldn't agree more. It feels that way when you say, I think the school lunches program was so that they could get into the mood for Oliver and just have kids showing up going, please, sir, may I have some more? Thank you, everyone, for the super chats. Really appreciated. Should we jump into the news then?
Yes. Enjoy the news. We'll be back after this.
Help keep poor people poor. Old man at train station derailed by free speech advocate. Will the US military shoot first and ask questions later? And artists so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't ask if they should. All that and more in this week's The News. Hello there, kia ora, I'm Paul, and oh yeah, I'm on to you. The coalition government released its second budget this week, to much meh from the public. Dubbed the growth budget by Finance Minister Nicola Willis, a number of experts agree the thing it grows will be inequality and rich people bank accounts. To make her budget books balance, Willis, seen here in front of a sign that's actually really great advice for anyone who spends time around the ACT Party, took almost $13 billion from women in the workforce, made life harder for young people on benefits, those needing to help cover the costs to study, 61,000 families with small children under the age of 3, those saving for their retirement or first homes, those wanting to see increased voter turnout from Māori and Pacifica communities, and those wanting to see functioning public services. In response to criticisms about the budget, a range of government ministers pointed out that they needed to take the money from low-paid people, and the public should just be grateful. The finance minister, seen here finding out that over 9,000 young people would be kicked off benefits under her new budget, tried to criticise the opposition by asking where would they get the money to pay landlords for their tax cuts. The break fees on ferries, tax incentives for tobacco companies, and investment in fossil fuels that may breach our EU free trade agreement if they didn't take it from the lowest earners and women. Adding, it's not like you can tax capital gains, tech companies, or get economic stimulus from ensuring a basic standard of living with a minimum universal basic income that helps ensure even the worst off have the best quality of life. Before the budget, Parliament grounds once again hosted another rallying protest against the actions of the government, in a protest on moving pay equity laws around. The hundreds of supporters chanted, laughed at, and brought attention to the speed in which the changes were pushed through, the lack of consultation with the wider public, and the use of urgency to pass the changes. When the crowd was cited, Workplace Relations Minister Brooke Van Velden, seen here showing you the bag she's going to throw your pay equity claims in before binning them, was overheard asking, "Should I say another bad word to distract the media again from all this?" At a post-budget speech in Auckland's Mount Albert Grammar School on Friday morning, Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here knowing she doesn't have to worry about pay equity for herself because her salary is set by an organisation that compares the duties and skills of her role with other comparable roles across sectors and governments, has said she expects the workforce for teachers and learning support roles to grow by 1,600 people by 2028. Said the minister, will have been voted out of government for 2 years by then, so the workforce may actually be paid what they're worth in 2028, which will help with that growth. Because clearly no one wants to take a job where they're underpaid on purpose to make sure landlords can have tax cuts. Speaking at his first post-budget engagement, the Prime Minister, seen here showing the crowd just how tall Simeon really is, has announced plans to campaign on raising the retirement age in 2026. Said the Prime Minister, since we have gutted government contributions to KiwiSaver, we know young people will need even longer in the workforce to save up for any kind of half-decent retirement. So this is us just giving them more time. The Waitangi Tribunal this week recommended an immediate halt to David Seymour's Regulatory Standards Bill, warning that the bill attempts to diminish the Crown's obligations to the country's founding document. It lacked consultation with Māori and created a deliberately misleading narrative of equality for all before the law, which assumes a level playing field which doesn't currently exist. Said the minister behind the bill, David Seymour, seen here running away from journalist Mihi Ngārangi Forbes as he avoids questions on his links to right-wing anti-Indigenous people think tanks in Canada. Wait, we still have that tribunal? I thought Richard Prebble shut it down. Isn't that what we put him in there for? The Prime Minister, seen here trying out the very stable genius Trump diet for world leaders, has come under fire for his comments on a recent Mike Hosking breakfast spot where he said that when the government spots Te Reo Māori being used, they call it out. I mean, it's clearly not called out by the listeners of the station who seem to think that it's absolutely fine to vilify the use of the Indigenous language of a country, but people with a rudimentary understanding of how this is anti-Māori have definitely seen it as racist. Said the Prime Minister, look, we know things like Maori road signs are triggering and that makes them, not the people triggered by them, unsafe, unlike the new signs that we've installed that have more fine print than an insurance contract. A heckler confronted soon-to-be former Deputy Prime Minister, again, Winston Peters, seen here showing his hands aren't shaking so he's clearly okay to drive, at the Wellington Central train station this week while he and Chris Bishop made an announcement about rail investment to try and sweeten the car crash of a budget. The heckler told the 80-year-old Peters he should retire and called him a wrinkled ballsack. Said a spokesperson for ballsacks, hey, we may not be pretty, but at least we have a function. A new report from the Privacy Commissioner shows a growing concern in the public around children's privacy, social media use, and the use of AI in decision-making. The Commission publishes an annual report on the ever-changing concerns of the public, which this year highlighted people asking what their private data was actually being used for, with 80% of respondents saying they wanted more control and choice over the collection of personal information. The Commission will be running a series of how-to workshops on the topic that people can sign up to. They just need to provide their mother's maiden name and the name of their first pet to do so. Hundreds of protesters filled the grounds of Parliament on Tuesday as debate began on the proposed suspension of Te Pāti Māori MPs for performing the haka after the vote finished on David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill. The White Privileges Committee has recommended a record amount of time for suspension, with the ACT Party member even pushing for more information about imprisoning her political rivals, which is clearly a very healthy element to have in any democracy. The debate was put off until June after the coalition decided it looked really bad to kick out half of a political party who stand for Indigenous rights as a central tenet of their kaupapa just before the budget, in the same week that the Prime Minister had already admitted to actively removing signs of Māoridom from the country. Before the shortened debate on Te Pāti Māori MPs started, Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here showing how large a shot of whiskey should be, was kicked out of the House for what has been revealed as referencing yet another online Twitter troll account with no viable source, this time one that had been amplified by online broadcaster Sean Plunkett. Said Peters afterwards, I know we tell kids, that they are shitty no-hopers without any future who don't understand the value of real work and how the world actually is and shouldn't believe everything that they read online, but clearly that doesn't apply to me. It's been revealed that Auckland War Memorial Museum is currently losing $19,000 a day as it's forced to stay closed due to the discovery of asbestos in the almost 100-year-old building. To safely reopen, the museum must first remove the substance and be cleared by WorkSafe, while also updating its fire evacuation plan. Said Auckland Councillor Ken Turner, seen here moments after telling another councillor how he signed a joint letter with Voices for Freedom members, far-right group members and local government officials aligned with disinformation groups, demanding the government ignore any future pandemic response advice from overseas organisations like the WHO. Why not let people just deal with the asbestos? At least it's historically accurate. And it's not like we have to listen to scientists when they tell us things are bad. What do they know? Kāinga Ora has announced a further reduction of roles, aiming to cull 620 of them from back office positions and corporate functions. Said a spokesperson for the organisation, when the government isn't building social housing and actively working to stop people from buying their first homes, there's really nothing for us to do all day anyway. This week, Wellington played host to the USS Blue Ridge, a US warship which leads the US Navy's 7th Fleet and is also the oldest ship in the US Navy. The Blue Ridge docked in the city while US Navy senior staff met with local counterparts for bilateral talks. The Wellington Harbour Master issued a no-go zone of 200 metres around the ship for other boats in the area, saying, "They're American, do you really think they won't shoot first?" The National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, have announced a systems test will take place this Sunday, May 25th, between 6 and 7 p.m. of its emergency mobile alert system. The regular test is part of a health check of sorts for the many communication tools civil defence often call on in times of an emergency. For those who do not want to receive the alert or who may be at risk if an alert was to go off unexpectedly, it's suggested mobile devices be put into flight mode or turned off during that hour. And for those who love the sound of alarms, it's best to find a busy mall somewhere at that time and just sit down and wait for the systems to go off. And finally, a new sculpture installed in Taupō as part of a new initiative to highlight the local creative sector has come under fire from some quarters as some funding for the piece was secured from the local council. While funding was secured over a decade ago, like all councils around the country, Taupō District Council is facing rates increases due to the increased costs of infrastructure and government-mandated costs, which has led to some locals questioning if funding this years ago was appropriate for the issues being faced today. The sculpture itself has a sauropod dinosaur shaped like an inflatable toy standing on a geometric rock and represents the town's playful nature, volcanic past, and its place as one of the few areas to have dinosaur fossils found in the country. Taupō Mayor David Troavis said he enjoyed the sculpture because dealing with the people who do nothing but complain about the town and never want to change anything definitely reminded him of Jurassic Park. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for the support this week. It's really an amazing motivator to keep doing what I'm doing, and together, I know we can make some positive changes. Until next time, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I'll catch you guys all next week. Oh, wow, that's like a weird split screen. I don't like this. I'm going to go back to this.
Whoops. Okay.
Yeah. Too many buttons.
Quickly before we go, don't forget Monday over on my channel, our first live episode of Access Granted with Tracy Martin. And trust me, we did the free interview a few weeks ago. You do not want to miss this one. And I'm not just trying to do a cheap plug. I'm serious.
I think it'll be really fascinating for a number of reasons. She's obviously very good at what she does, and she's very, very dedicated to helping senior citizens, which is absolutely brilliant. You know, that's exactly what we want for people working in these roles. The thing that gets me, though, is, she's a former New Zealand First MP she was not afraid to tell us what she thought about the current New Zealand First. So that should make for some interesting viewing. So, that's easy enough to track down. Just go to the BFG podcast.
Spoiler alert, she doesn't like them.
Not a fan. Not a fan at all. And also, I want to point out that news, there was, I think there's at least 2, possibly 3 little bits of information that are going to be in a documentary that I'm working on for local body election stuff. So check some stuff out there. There's some really scary stuff coming up. And I think when people see that documentary, they'll be able to come back and watch the news that we did tonight, just going, oh, it all makes so much sense now. Ooh, gross. But we'll worry about that in July when that comes out. And that, I think that's us for the night.
Yeah. We'll let you know if there's going to be a usual Friday show or not later in the week. So much going on at the moment.
So much to juggle. It's great fun. But I should probably give the heads up. I'm going to take off like 2 weeks in July. So people should get their fill of the show now.
Yeah. That's going to be fun. But I've already booked some fun stuff for the back end of the year, so watch out for that.
Perfect. Right. I'm going to press the button that says end stream. Thank you very much, everybody who has been out there watching. Great comments, great chat coming through. We will catch you guys all next time.
See you Monday.